Hi, and welcome back to the DPAF. And in this podcast, I wanted to inquire about why the vaccinated are so upset. Why are vaccinated people so worried about the unvaccinated? Why has this all of a sudden become a pandemic of the unvaccinated when only 12 months ago everyone was unvaccinated? So the people being blamed now are being blamed by the people who were doing exactly what they're doing now 12 months ago. And I did a video recently about Jurgen Klopp, the Liverpool manager, who's been complaining about all these unvaccinated players. He having signed a bunch of unvaccinated players over the last 24 months. Also, all the politicians are constantly now complaining about unvaccinated people. And I mean, if you think about it, what have vaccinated people got to complain about? I mean, they got the vaccine 1 and 2 last summer. They got the booster kind of around September. Now they're getting booster 2 or vaccine 4, however you want to look at it. And yet they're still complaining. They're complaining about everything, and yet all you ever hear from authorities is the only people that are in hospital are unvaccinated. So if you're a vaccinated person, what's wrong with just getting on with your life? You can go and live a free life. You can do boosters anytime you want. You can go into restaurants and shops. You can travel. You just got to provide the vaccine passport. You can literally do anything you want to do, and yet they're still complaining. And even the Archbishop of Canterbury was coming out saying it's all about the unvaccinated getting vaccinated because, you know, what if your neighbour catches the virus? Well, how are they going to catch it if they're vaccinated? I mean, if the neighbour's vaccinated, you don't have to worry. So I think this is all a total load of fraud. But of course, it really highlights the point that the vaccines don't actually do what they were advertised as. They don't stop the virus, they don't stop the spread, they don't stop the lockdown, they don't stop the hospitals being overwhelmed. And of course, the British government absolutely love the idea of hospitals getting overwhelmed. How many hospitals have been built since March 2020? We had the Nightingale built, but that was then taken down. We're always complaining about a lack of beds. Yet we never spend any money making beds or building beds. Now we're talking about a shortage of nurses and doctors because of the vaccine mandates. And, it just highlights for me and probably for a lot of you, this is not a health crisis. This is a deliberate economic crisis caused by the fact that we have massive amounts of debt, both in our country and around the world. And this is caused by total financial mismanagement by the authorities, by the government. And instead of admitting that mistake, they want to create this health crisis, which was created in a lab in China by the British and American governments. And then we want to blame everyone but the people in charge. And we've also got this big story going around these days about the variant, the Omicron variant. And of course, the Omicron variant was, like literally 4 weeks ago, the Botswana variant. And it lasted as the Botswana variant for about 2 days, and then it became the South Africa variant. And then the people in South Africa were saying this isn't that serious. And then literally overnight, it became the Omicron. And as soon as it became the Omicron, it spread around the world like wildfire. I mean, it's just like the same as the Delta variant. I mean, like I did a video back on September 24th talking about how the Delta variant was the Nepal variant, and then it was the India variant. And then as soon as it became the Delta variant, it was everywhere. And it's amazing how as soon as they changed the name to not representing where it came from, it spreads dramatically. And so this is maybe a lesson for the government. If you just don't change the name, the virus might not spread. The variant might not spread. So this is just a repeat of what happened back in the summer. It was Nepal, India, Delta, then it spread. And then this one was Botswana, South Africa, and Omicron, and then it spread. So if you just don't change the name, maybe it won't spread so fast. So that's maybe a lesson for government. The Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, came out and said we could never have predicted the Delta and Omicron variants. And I literally predicted this one. I mean, I predicted it on September 24th. I'll link the video in the description. The video title was predicting the next variant, or what happened to the variants. And so if I can predict it, why can the top people in the US government not predict it? I think that's an important question. Also, we have this issue of the Omicron variant. It was the South Africa, like I said. And of course, South Africa, this is the second time the variants have come from there. You'll remember back in the spring, I think we had the South Africa variant, and also before then, we had the Kent variant. And my last video was predicting the next one. I did get the name wrong. I called it the Isle of Wight variant, but of course, it is actually Botswana. So 2 variants coming from South Africa. One remained South Africa, the other became Omicron. I don't know if there's any lessons to be learned there. But of course, the fraud continues. The total and complete fraud of stop the spread, stay at home, flatten the curve, becomes vaccine passports, which Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer both said were not British. Now they're introduced. And the next thing is the compulsory vaccinations, which totally violates the Nuremberg Code. Boris Johnson says we've got to look into it. And of course, what happened to all the my body, my choice people? I mean, there were so many protests over the last sort of 10 years. Feminists out there saying my body, my choice. We needed to have abortion on demand. Well, what about my body, not my choice, which is the new state of affairs with compulsory vaccines? And rather than having abortion on demand, what about compulsory abortion, which is just like compulsory vaccines? What business is it of the government to force you to have a medical treatment that you don't want? Also, let's remind ourselves about the Second World War. What was the point of fighting the Second World War? Well, as I've always been taught, it was so we could live in freedom today. And how many remembrance services have you been to, kind of like what I've been to, where the vicar will say, we will remember them, and everyone repeats, we will remember them. And that refers to all the soldiers, the British soldiers that sacrificed their lives and lost their lives so we can live in freedom today. So we didn't have to face a government like the German government of the 1930s, where, you're sent to concentration camps, where you have forced medical experiments, where you have tyranny, where you have propaganda everywhere you look. And, the British attitude was, we don't want this. We signed the Nuremberg Code. We had the Nuremberg trials to prosecute all these criminals. And yet now we have the same people doing it today, and no one seems to talk about it. I mean, what was the point of fighting the Second World War so we could live in freedom today if we can't live in freedom today? If you've got to have forced vaccinations, if you've got to have all this shaming of the pandemic of the unvaccinated, if we've got to create a two-tier society, what was the point in fighting the Second World War? Why don't we just not bother? Also, what about if we have another war? Are unvaccinated people exempt from fighting it because they might spread the virus among our troops? I highly doubt it. I would imagine that the unvaccinated will be called straight into action if we have a war. I'm not saying I hope that we do, but if we had to fight for freedom back in 1939, do we not have to fight for freedom again now? Maybe it'll be done a different way. Final thing I've been thinking about is how this two-tiered society, or the lockdown of the unvaccinated, really makes the case for private healthcare. The NHS has now become a tool for government to use for medical tyranny. But of course, they're saying that, unvaccinated people clogging up NHS hospitals mean that they're, not going to be allowed to get treatment, even though they have to pay their taxes that pay for the NHS. They're not going to be allowed to use it. So therefore, I wonder if unvaccinated people can opt out of paying taxes for NHS treatment. NHS can just become somewhere where people can contribute financially if they want to use it. But if they don't want to use it, or if they're banned from using it, they then have the choice to spend their disposable income on private medical treatment. Maybe they can speak to their doctors more about whether these vaccines are safe. How many people listening to this that have had the vaccine had it administered by their GP? What's all this stuff about these boosters and vaccines being administered in sports stadiums or in supermarket car parks? Why can't it be done by your GP, who actually understands your health needs and your health condition, who is responsible for your overall health? Why can't you speak to them about whether you get the vaccine? Why can't they administer it for you? Is it maybe because if there's any adverse reactions, there's no accountability by anyone? There's no accountability by the vaccine companies, you can't sue them, and there's no accountability by the administrators, who are just volunteers, who maybe work for local government. I think it's an interesting thing that people need to look into. So a lot of fraud. I predicted the variants, even though the US government said they couldn't. British government exploiting the fear to the maximum extent possible. But yet, from all these parties they had last Christmas that has conveniently come into the news this Christmas as opposed to back then, why is it that the higher-ups in the British establishment are not afraid of the virus? They want you to be afraid, they want me to be afraid, but for some reason they are not afraid. Why is that? Why doesn't someone find that out? Maybe they should look into their fear levels more. Maybe they should look into punishing the powers that be within the government that are solely focused on terrifying British citizens, which should become a criminal offence and which is a total and complete disgrace. So I hope this video has provided food for thought. Please subscribe to the channel and I'll talk to you soon.